Lucas's angry words hit me like a slap. How dare the maid skimp on cooking? He yelled, his voice full of anger. The word maid made my heart sink. It had been 2 years since Lucas and I got married, and I started wondering if he'd seen me as just a maid all this time. Tears blurred my vision. It wasn't the yelling that got to me. It was the frustration and sadness that brought tears to my eyes. You think crying will get you off the hook? Lucas's sharp voice followed, and then something was thrown at me. Even through my teary eyes, I knew it was dangerous. Instinctively, I crouched down. Something flew over my head and crashed against the wall with a loud sound. Cautiously, I looked up to see what it was. A beer bottle. What if it had hit me? A deep fear set in, and I realized I couldn't take it anymore. I needed more than just to leave. I needed retribution. He had to understand the pain and humiliation he'd put me through. As I stood up, resolved, I heard footsteps behind me. My name is Lily Brown, a 29-year-old housewife. It's been 2 years since I married Lucas, but we haven't been blessed with children yet. Instead, about 6 months ago, we started living with my father-in-law, Henry. Last March, his wife passed away, leaving him alone, and we couldn't leave Dad by himself. After discussing it, we invited him to stay with us. We're in an apartment now, but we plan to buy a new house next spring. Lucas's income is decent, and we're living comfortably. I have to appear happy, otherwise Lucas wouldn't be satisfied. You really are frail, aren't you? Lucas said, more in disbelief than concern, as I managed to sit up in bed. I'm sorry, I mumbled. It's okay. I'll take out the trash for you, he replied, leaving the room. Lucas helps with housework sometimes, like today, when I'm not feeling well. He'll step in, but he just doesn't get the essence of household chores. He carelessly puts out the wrong kind of trash on burnable trash day and doesn't even think about sorting it. When he brings in the laundry, he just throws it in the room without folding it. He only does the visible chores, which is why in our neighborhood, Lucas is known as the ideal husband. You're lucky, Iris. With Lucas's good income, you don't have to work, and he even helps with the chores, my neighbors would say. I couldn't tell them the truth. I just smiled strangely. It's true that Lucas's income isn't low, and thanks to that, I don't have to work. But he only gives me a portion of his salary. Manage this month's expenses with this, he said, and at first, I was puzzled. It was just barely enough. I thought about getting a job, but Lucas dismissed the idea with annoyance. We might run short this month, I argued. I'll keep up with the chores. But Lucas never agreed. At first, I thought he was concerned about my health. But then I realized it wasn't the case. Once, he said, if you work, it'll look like my income is low. You enjoy ruining my reputation, don't you? I hung my head and realized Lucas didn't want me to work to maintain his reputation. He even told the neighbors. She's frail, so I have to help her out. She can't manage the household chores alone, let alone work. The neighbors praised Lucas, while they thought less of me. Your husband's struggling. You should bear with it a bit more, right? They'd say whenever I showed a hint of weakness. Lucas wasn't lying. He was just exaggerating the truth, so I couldn't argue back. I could only force a bitter, self-deprecating smile. And yet, Lucas couldn't manage the household chores perfectly. He mixed up the trash again. Late at night, I would sneak out to the trash area to check. I could see the misplaced trash without even opening the bags. I'd take it back home and put out the correct trash on the right day, sighing in relief. The next day, Lucas would wake up with a smug look on his face. See? Because I'm helping with the chores, you have it easy, right? Yeah, thanks, I would say, forcing a smile. I couldn't tell him the truth. It would hurt his pride. As Lucas happily ate breakfast, I brought up his father. About your father, What about him? Lucas replied. His legs are getting weaker, and he's having trouble with the stairs in our apartment. Maybe it's better if he goes to a facility. Lucas's smile faded. He's my dad. What do you think of him? I think he's a respectable man who worked until retirement, holding important positions. That's why I want him to enjoy his retirement. So you want to dump him in a facility? Speak your mind. You just don't want to take care of him, right? That's not. I was about to deny it when my father-in-law walked in, leaning on his cane. I quickly stood up to help him. Good morning, I greeted him. Good morning, he replied. I quickly stood up to help him. Good morning, I greeted him. Good morning, he replied. Dad, Lucas began proudly, she wants to put you in a facility because she doesn't want to take care of you. That's not what I meant, I protested. My father-in-law sighed. A facility, huh? Might be a good idea at my age. Stairs and steps are tough. Dad, don't say that. Lucas pleaded. He'd been using his care for his father as a way to appeal to the neighbors, taking on visible tasks like hospital visits and walks. But at home he barely paid attention to him. Even now, Lucas remained seated next to me. We'll buy a house and live together, he said. We'll make sure it's barrier-free. Lucas laughed like a dutiful son, but his father's expression was anything but pleased. He saw through the act, knowing Lucas's concern was just for show. My father-in-law sighed after Lucas left for work, saying, Lucas always liked to play the part of the top student, huh? He uses friends as stepping stones to stand out. I never thought he'd still be like that at this age. I forced a smile, more to convince myself than to address my father-in-law. He's trying to help us in his own way. I said, I'm sorry, Iris, my father-in-law murmured, looking down. Right after we got married, Lucas suggested we save up for a new house. I agree without much thought, but now I regret it. Please, we really need more money for this month. Can I have a bit more for the expenses? I asked. Lucas responded coldly. It's money we need for our dream. Not a penny can go to waste. I tried to explain that food and utilities were necessary, but Lucas declared, that's because you're being too lenient. Think harder. There must be something you can cut back on. I was at a loss. I was already wearing old clothes and only getting haircuts twice a year. Even with groceries, I bought discounted items and used beans to bulk up meals. There was no luxury in our life except maybe for Lucas's nightly beer and snacks. What about Lucas's drinks and snacks? I suggested. That's me rewarding myself for working hard, he replied. I nodded, realizing I never had a moment to reward myself. I'd love a simple dessert like pudding, but there's no money for such luxuries in the budget Lucas gives me. Managing the finances is your job. Do your best. Yeah, I'll try, I responded, even though I thought I was already doing my best. I couldn't say that out loud. He wouldn't listen. Lucas was saving for our dream of a new house, and I was determined to support that dream, no matter the cost. I'm going to take a bath. Can you get my change of clothes ready? Lucas asked. Got it, I replied, taking his jacket from him. As I did, a realization struck me. Lucas's jacket smelled of perfume. He doesn't wear perfume, so why? Iris, what's wrong? He asked. Nothing, I replied with a forced smile, trying to cover up my inner turmoil. I was near panic. Why would Lucas's jacket have the scent of perfume on it? Had someone been close to him? A woman. I tried to convince myself it was a coincidence. Maybe someone wearing perfume had been near him on a crowded train. But the more I thought about it, the more my suspicions grew. Could Lucas be cheating? Despite Lucas working hard every day, doubting him felt terrible. But I couldn't shake the feeling. I thought about confiding in my father-in-law, but decided against it. He already lamented Lucas's true nature. I didn't want to trouble him further. This was something I had to bear alone. A few days later, in desperation, I contacted a private investigator. I hoped to prove Lucas's innocence, but I requested an infidelity investigation anyway. The results came quickly. I hesitated to open the envelope, struggling with my decision. Finally, I pulled out the documents. "No way," I whispered, speechless. There were photos of Lucas looking intimate with a young woman. Photos capturing their intimate moments were enclosed. Lucas had been visiting the construction site of our new house with his mistress. What was he thinking? As I read further into the investigation results, I found out that most of the money Lucas claimed he was saving was actually being spent on his mistress. He made me live like this, yet he was with her. A wave of emotions surged from the pit of my stomach, a mix of sadness and anger. I couldn't bear it anymore. I decided that when Lucas came home, I'd confront him with the truth. But it felt pointless. What would confronting him achieve? Lucas would surely be furious. He'd probably never admit to anything. What would I do then? I didn't want to break up. Despite his betrayal, I still couldn't bring myself to hate Lucas. I loved him, which was why I married him. But what about him? Does he still love me? I didn't know, but I didn't want to break up. I wanted to pretend I hadn't seen anything and continue living with Lucas in our new house, with my father-in-law, and maybe eventually have children. I dreamed of such a life, but my thoughts crumbled with my tears. This can't be true. This can't be happening. I felt nauseous as I cried. I locked myself in the bathroom, but the nausea wouldn't go away. After taking some medicine, I barely made it to my bed. It was already evening when I checked the clock. I had to prepare dinner, but I couldn't move. Lucas would be home soon. What should I do? In desperation, I made a decision. "I'm sorry, I'm feeling sick today. I couldn't cook, so can you make do with this?" I said as Lucas came home, observing his reaction. The dinner table was laid with frozen, ready-made dishes, mostly things I had stocked up for my lunches, like pasta and hamburgers. They must have been Lucas's favorites, but he glared at me furiously. "Don't mess with me," Lucas said in a low, grumbling voice. "What do you mean by a maid skipping cooking?" he shouted. His loud, angry voice made me cower. Tears streamed from my eyes, not out of fear but frustration. Maid. So that's how Lucas saw me, not as his wife but just as a working maid. "You think crying will get you off the hook?" he shouted sharply, grabbing something and throwing it. I instinctively crouched down as I heard the crash of breaking glass. Turning around, I saw a beer bottle had hit the wall and shattered, its contents slowly staining the floor. I suddenly thought, I've had enough. I can't stay with Lucas anymore. But just leaving wasn't enough. Lucas had called me a maid, so I had the right to ask for compensation in the name of retribution. Just as I was about to stand up, I heard footsteps behind me. What's all this noise? It was my father-in-law. "It's none of your business, Dad," Lucas said dismissively. But my father-in-law saw the shattered beer bottle and seemed to understand everything. His face turned as fierce as his son's, his usual gentleness gone. "You raised your hand against your own wife. What are you doing?" "I had no choice," Lucas said weakly, hanging his head like a scolded child. He cast his eyes around, turning to me as if expecting help, but I had no obligation to offer any. "Enough," my father-in-law said, crossing his arms and watching Lucas. Lucas seemed to realize that throwing the beer bottle was a mistake. If it had hit me, he could have been arrested on the spot. "Iris, thank you for everything, but I can't let my son treat you this way anymore. Could you please leave him?" "Dad, I was planning to do that," I replied, showing my respect with a salute. "Thank you for everything until now, father-in-law." "Hey, Iris, your maid is quitting today," I said formally, then stepped into the hallway. I began to pack my belongings from our shared room. "Goodbye, goodbye," I repeated to myself. With each repetition, the last of my love and attachment to Lucas faded. This was right. I had come to see Lucas as less than a stranger, leaving behind numerous humiliations he had caused me. What will I do now? I muttered. Just then, Lucas entered the room flustered. Hey Iris, you're not seriously leaving, are you? I am. I'll file for divorce. Don't take what my father said seriously. You're not feeling well, right? Just rest. So I would be failing as a maid, right? My voice was cold. You're upset about the maid comment. Upset or not, I said, continuing to pack. That's your true feeling. Well, yeah, but a wife and a maid are similar, right? Both handle household chores and support someone who works outside, right? I paused and glanced at Lucas. You're looking down on all housewives, not just me. Why would you think that? Lucas yelled like a child. Iris, tell my father we're not breaking up. I can't do that. Why not? Because I'm serious about leaving you. Lucas was speechless. I resumed packing. Lucas, my father-in-law, called out, "Come back here. We need to talk. Give me a break," Lucas said, reluctantly leaving the room. I sighed. I'll go back to my parents' house for now, I concluded and left the apartment. My sudden return caused a stir at home. This is terrible, my mother frowned after hearing the story. My father even wanted to contact Lucas, perhaps to yell at him, but I stopped him. I never wanted to hear Lucas's voice again. What will you do now? I don't know. I had no savings as life had always been a struggle. The only money I had was a little left from my days as a single office worker. But I won't trouble you and Mom. I'll find an apartment and move out. Stay here, my father said, almost pleading. Dad, as a man, I'm ashamed my own daughter is going through this. I can't let you live alone with all these worries. You're exaggerating. I laughed, but my father's face was serious. Stay for us, Iris. Okay. I agreed, my smile fading as tears started to roll down my cheeks. My mother hugged me, and I cried out loud, clinging to her. The next day, I filed for divorce. After mailing the papers to Lucas, I felt a sense of relief. Lucas called soon after, but I didn't answer. A few days later, my father-in-law called. His voice was a mix of concern and uncertainty. I'm sorry for my son's actions. No, it's okay. I was grateful to have seen his true nature early on, I answered honestly. In the past, I might not have blamed Lucas for his questionable behavior. I convinced myself he was just tired or found some other reason, turning a blind eye to the truth. Lucas doesn't want a divorce, but don't worry. I'll take responsibility and free you from my son. Thank you, I said, putting my hand on my chest, though we were talking on the phone. I have a proposal. What is it? I'm thinking of leaving Lucas. I plan to find a facility and move in. That's so sudden. It's something I've been considering for a while. His voice grew somber. Understandably, his son's misdeeds were the cause, yet he hadn't forgotten his original purpose for calling. The reason my son hasn't let me go is the pension and above all the inheritance, right? Yes, his voice was heavy. Lucas won't leave me because he wants to ensure he inherits my estate. You must have heard something from him. Yes, Lucas often mentioned it, he said. Once the inheritance comes through, paying off the house loan will be a breeze. Lucas had sworn me to secrecy, but it didn't matter now. After all, he had squandered our savings on his mistress. The funds for the new house must be insufficient. How would he cover that? He was counting on his father's inheritance. I'm thinking of writing a will. Please don't talk about such grim things. No, I have no intention of leaving any money to Lucas. But Iris, he hesitated briefly, I want to repay you. I'm thinking of leaving my estate to you. What are you saying? I raised my voice. It was natural for family to take care of each other, yet he was thanking me. Perhaps it included compensation for the humiliation I suffered from Lucas. He wanted to convey that, which was why he had called. But I couldn't accept it. Please stop. I can't accept it. I don't even want to think about what happens after you're gone. I have cancer. What? I almost dropped my smartphone. You're joking, right? It seems Lucas hasn't told you about my hospital visits. I thought it was just rehabilitation for your legs. I shuddered at the horror. Lucas was aiming for his father's inheritance. I had thought it was an unrealistic notion. His father was still in his 60s, weakened but seemingly healthy. But the reality was different. Lucas was expecting his father's imminent departure and the inheritance to fall into his lap. Would anyone honestly want to leave an inheritance to such a son? If that's the case, the pieces of the story started to fit together in my mind. My father-in-law was furious, quietly but surely. He had been waiting for an opportunity to retaliate against his son, and now he had found an ally in me. I understand. I'll follow your wishes, father-in-law. Iris, but in return, could you help me with something? What is it? I want to give Lucas and his mistress a taste of their own medicine, I said honestly. My father-in-law had opened up to me, so now it was my turn to be candid. Lucas plans to move in with his mistress into the new house after the divorce. That foolish son, he muttered. But before that, I'm going to make sure he breaks up with her. I had a plan, and with my father-in-law's support, there could be nothing more reassuring. 3 days later, Lucas called me furiously. Iris, what did you tell my father? What do you mean? I feigned ignorance even though I knew exactly what he was talking about. My father is going to disinherit me. If that happens, all his money won't go to you, I said calmly. Lucas's voice became frantic. Not just that, he met with Catherine, my girlfriend, and persuaded her to break up with me. He told her about how I threw a beer bottle at you and called you a maid. But all of that is true, right? I thought to myself that Lucas had it coming. He looked down on women. Once his true nature was revealed, any woman would leave him, especially someone who extracted money from him like water. I couldn't believe she loved Lucas for who he was, but rather was attracted to his financial appeal. Catherine said she didn't think I was that kind of person. But you are that kind of person. What's your problem? Lucas lashed out, but I didn't care. I was the one who had informed my father-in-law about the mistress. You're bold, Lucas. Choosing a mistress from the same apartment complex. I was utterly dismayed. It was a clear sign of how little he regarded me. But if it weren't so, my father-in-law with his bad legs wouldn't have been able to meet the mistress. You're the one who instigated my father. Why would you think that? Ignoring my question, Lucas continued angrily. This is roundabout. If you wanted me to break up with Catherine, you could have told me directly. Instead, you embarrassed me by having my own father expose my shame. That would have a bigger impact on you, I replied calmly. There was no winner's satisfaction. There was only emptiness. You knew and sent my father to humiliate me further. Even if that's true, what of it? You're disowned by your father. The inheritance you relied on won't come. Give up on the new house, I said, ready to end the call. Lucas had nothing left. His mistress had left him, and his dream of a new home had vanished. Wait, what now? Is that all? What do you mean? I was genuinely perplexed. The recipient of my father's inheritance, it's you, right? Quite the turnaround from a maid to this. You still think of me as a maid? Of course, he retorted, trying his best to hurt me. He was miserable and wanted to drag me down with him. Such spiteful thinking must have been at play. It was just as I thought. Lucas, you're really predictable. But thanks to that, you've helped me. I've recorded this conversation. I'll use it when I demand alimony from you. What? He exclaimed in shock. Don't joke around. The more you talk, the worse it gets for you. That's the kind of person you are. Damn it. Lucas sounded utterly frustrated. Alimony after taking the inheritance. You still want to bleed me dry? Yes. I wouldn't be satisfied otherwise. To be honest, the money didn't matter. All I wanted was an apology from him. It should have been enough. You greedy woman, he finally said in a fit of sour grapes, ending the call. I sighed. He still doesn't understand how wrong he was, muttering to myself. I spread out the documents on the table, evidence of Lucas's infidelity, copies of a diary I kept detailing the cruel actions Lucas had continuously taken against me. I gathered these and sent them anonymously to the company where Lucas worked. Then I found out what happened to Lucas from a desperate call he made to me. Just stop it. My reputation is in tatters. I can't stay at my job, and I'm being ignored by the neighbors. But it's all true. If you won't admit it, let others judge. That's what I thought, and they judged Lucas as the bad guy. Still, he continued to defend himself. Now I'm unemployed, and you want alimony. I can't pay that. Really? But you had that savings, I reminded him. He seemed taken aback. I spent all that money on Catherine. I don't have a penny left. That's pathetic. Catherine, too, had left him after all his devotion. I wonder what Lucas, who can't cook for himself, looks like now. Now unemployed, Lucas must be in a pitiful state, holed up in his apartment. Once his food runs out, he'll have to go outside, and when he does, he'll face the cold stares of the neighbors all at once. Come back to me. Why would I? If you come back, it'll clear up the misunderstandings the neighbors have about me. Misunderstandings. That's right. It's all your delusion. His tone softened. You were weak and couldn't work or manage household chores properly. I was supporting you, Iris. I felt a cold wind blow through my mind as I spoke. That's how you treat me. As weak and trying to owe me a favor. I don't want to owe you a favor. I won't be fooled again. No matter what you say, you can't undo those words. I was referring to the day he called me a maid. Our relationship as husband and wife had ended then. It could never go back to how it was. Goodbye, Lucas. Iris, wait. Lucas's desperate shout echoed in my ears. I frowned and ended the call. My father-in-law contacted me. The facility you recommended is great. I'm glad. He had achieved his dream of barrier-free living. I don't have long left. I just want to live comfortably. I informed my father-in-law that I would visit him soon. Lucas tried contacting me several times, but I ignored him. Eventually, it became bothersome, so I changed my phone number. After convincing my worried parents, I now live in a different city. My apartment is smaller than before, but the rent is cheaper. I was enjoying my freedom. Lucas had assumed I couldn't work, but that wasn't true. Since working every day was physically demanding, I started a part-time job with an adjusted schedule. The manager was understanding about my health condition. That's tough, but I think you're doing great, Iris. Thank you, I replied, truly happy. Holding my paycheck, I felt elated. I could live on my own strength. I earned this myself. The days when I was controlled and forced to depend on Lucas were over. I had escaped the nightmare. Though I often missed work and my salary was modest, it was enough to pay rent with some leftover. With what I have now, I can survive. I've really gotten the hang of saving money. I wasn't sure if I was impressed or dismayed. In any case, I was good at saving. I would live on my own or perhaps not entirely alone. Oh, there he was again, a customer who always came at the same time. He was quiet, only saying, "Thank you" at the checkout. Yet that single word made my heart flutter. He would look at me intently, then awkwardly shift his gaze. He must like you, Iris. Really? I smiled, hoping it was true.
The incessant pounding at the door jolted me awake. I glanced at the clock. 11:37 p.m. Fear crept in as I clutched my robe, tiptoeing down the stairs. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice shaky. "Grandma, it's us! Please open up!" Two small voices pierced through the howling wind and pelting rain. I swung the door open to find my grandsons, Alex and Caleb, drenched and shivering on my doorstep. Caleb clung to a crumpled piece of paper in his tiny fist. "Boys? What on earth?" My words caught in my throat as I ushered them inside, wrapping them in thick towels. "Mom, she left us at the park," Alex said between chattering teeth. "She told us to come here." Caleb shakily held up the note. "Read it, Grandma." My hands trembled as I smoothed out the soggy paper. 5 scrawled words made my heart plummet. "Take them to Grandma's house." Jenna's looping cursive mocked me from the page. How could she abandon her own children like this? "I'm so sorry, boys," I whispered, pulling them into a fierce embrace. Caleb's little body shook with sobs. "You're safe now. I've got you." I marched them upstairs, bundling them into warm pajamas. Haunted eyes followed my every move as they huddled on the guest bed. "Will Mom come back for us?" Caleb asked, his voice tiny and fragile. I froze, unsure how to respond. After everything she'd put them through, would Jenna really want them back? Swallowing hard, I gently brushed Caleb's damp curls from his forehead. "We'll figure this out tomorrow. Tonight, you just need to rest." Alex remained stoic, clenching his jaw to mask the fear flickering in his eyes. At 10 years old, he tried so hard to be the brave one. As I settled into the armchair beside their bed, their shuddering breaths slowed into the peaceful rhythm of sleep. Yet haunting questions whirled in my mind, dark memories stirring. My relationship with Jenna had been fraught from the beginning. The sweet, loving girl my son Derek fell for vanished after their wedding, replaced by someone manipulative and cold-hearted. Still, she was their mother. What desperation could drive a parent to abandon their own flesh and blood? A gnawing suspicion took root. This was about more than just bad parenting. Staring at my grandson's sleeping forms, their cheeks still glistening with drying tears, a fierce protectiveness burned within me. I would get to the bottom of Jenna's deceit, whatever it took. For now they were home, they were safe, and I would do everything in my power to ensure it stayed that way. As the first pale rays peeked through the curtains, I allowed my eyes to drift shut, steeling myself for the maelstrom ahead. The shrill trill of the phone jolted me awake at the crack of dawn. I immediately tensed, scanning the bed. Relief washed over me as I saw Alex and Caleb huddled together, still slumbering peacefully. "Hello?" I whispered, padding out of the room. "Mrs. Mitchell, this is Sheriff Davis. We received a troubling report last night from a family at Oak Ridge Park." My stomach twisted into knots as the sheriff proceeded to recount how a hysterical Jenna had shown up in the middle of the night, rambling about voices telling her to hurt the boys. She'd fled before the cops arrived, leaving Alex and Caleb alone on a rain-soaked park bench. "We've been searching all night, but there's no sign of her." His gruff voice softened. "I know you two had your differences, but are the boys safe with you?" Squeezing my eyes shut, I managed a tight nod before realizing he couldn't see me. Yes, they're here, safe and sound." After ending the call, my hands trembled as I glimpsed the shredded remnants of my tranquil, retired life around me. How could Jenna put her own sons through such trauma? I hurried back to the bedroom, my heart clenching at the sight of them cuddled together like orphaned kittens. Jenna's depraved actions were utterly unforgivable, but what terrified me most was the possibility of far deeper depravities lurking beneath the surface. Voices telling her to hurt them, or her own twisted thoughts whirling out of control. Over the next few days, I discreetly made inquiries around town, desperate for any clues that could shed light on the dark path Jenna had ventured down. What I uncovered made my blood run cold. "She's lost her mind, plain and simple," Derek's old friend Mitch grimly told me one afternoon while I had the boys occupied playing in the backyard. "Got mixed up with some real nasty people, from what I gathered." My heart pounded as Mitch detailed rumors of shady business deals, illicit money trails, and unsettling new acquaintances in Jenna's life. "They're saying she did things, illegal things, to keep the cash flowing after Derek." He shook his grizzled head sadly. After Derek's death in that horrific car crash 6 months ago, Jenna had rapidly changed, staying out at all hours, dressing in ostentatious new clothes, and lavishly showering the boys with toys and gifts she couldn't afford on a widow's pension. The picture grew exponentially uglier the more I unearthed. Theft, embezzlement, fraud, no depravity seemed off-limits in Jenna's warped quest for wealth and status. And at the center of this web of lies and immorality were my beloved grandsons, forced to fend for themselves as collateral damage while their own mother indulged her demons. One night after the boys were tucked in, I stood at the bay window, staring out at the inky darkness. "I will burn it all down to ashes if I have to," I murmured in a voice that chilled even me. "She won't go unpunished for this, not on my watch." The wheels were in motion to expose the full extent of Jenna's deception. I could only pray I wasn't too late to protect Alex and Caleb from the worst of the fallout. The rusty hinges of the attic door protested as I pulled it down, thick dust motes swirling in the beam of my flashlight. I couldn't recall the last time I'd ventured up here. After Derek's passing, Any reminders were too agonizing. But to have a prayer of protecting Alex and Caleb from Jenna's toxicity, I needed to understand how we'd arrived at this catastrophic juncture. So I steeled myself and climbed the creaky ladder. Coughing through the musty air, I aimed my light across a maze of boxes and trunks packed with decades of memories. My gaze snagged on a crooked stack of faded photo albums. With a lump in my throat, I sank onto the dusty floor, pulling them into my lap one by one. Smiling faces of happier times beamed back at me. An 8-year-old Derek, freckles dancing across his nose as he grinned at the camera on his Little League baseball team's picture day. High school graduation, his lanky frame dwarfing that ridiculous maroon cap and gown. Our tight-knit trio on my front porch after he'd moved into his first college dorm room, already looking so grown up. My chest ached as I drank in every moment, unable to fathom how that sweet, vibrant boy had become the haggard, haunted man who ultimately couldn't outrun his demons. Then the photos shifted. Derek's energetic smile remained, but his arm was slung around a pretty blonde girl with an equally megawatt grin. Jenna. I'll never forget the day he arrived home from university on Christmas break, hands trembling with poorly disguised excitement as he introduced us to his new girlfriend. How her dimpled cheeks and sparkling eyes instantly camouflaged the punkish, asymmetrical haircut and bare midriff that made me inwardly cringe. She's the one, Mom. Derek had whispered to me in the kitchen that night as she dazzled my husband with some anecdote about hitchhiking through Amsterdam one summer. I know it seems crazy since we've only been dating for a few months, but she's my soulmate. Part of me wanted to bundle him back into his Star Wars sheets from childhood and never let him go. But I couldn't ignore the sheer incandescence radiating from my typically brooding son. So I smiled and welcomed Jenna into our family with open arms. How I lived to regret that decision. The subsequent albums told a heartbreaking tale, one of increasing loneliness on Derek's face as the wattage on Jenna's dimmed through their wedding portraits and into the first couple years of their marriage. Finally, I flipped to the last few pages and recoiled. Here were my grandsons, capturing in wide grins and crinkled nose giggles. But the woman beside them was utterly unrecognizable. Cold, hollow eyes bored into the camera. Painted smiles slashed across her taut face with all the authenticity of a circus clown. Where had my sweet, goofy Jenna gone? The one who taught me how to twerk at their engagement party? The girl who threatened to burn her eyebrows off while helping me make adorable, succulent pumpkin centerpieces for their fall wedding? Slapping the album shut, I shuddered as the revelations washed over me. Jenna's betrayal of Derek ran even deeper than I could have imagined. She'd sucked the very light and joy from his spirit long before his tragic demise last year. I swiped at the heated tears streaking my cheeks as a grim calm settled over me. Whatever drove Jenna to her current depths of immorality, her own children would not be her next victims. Not if I had any say in the matter. This is ridiculous. You can't keep my children from me. Jenna's shrill voice sliced through the diner's murmured chatter like fingernails on a chalkboard. I stiffened as she stormed up to our booth, eyes wild and knuckles blanched from clutching her purse strap. Alex and Caleb instantly shrank back against the cracked vinyl seat. Caleb whimpered, and I instinctively tugged them closer under the safety of my arms. Don't you dare upset them further, I warned in a low tone. The boys are terrified of you, Jenna, and after what you pulled, can you blame them? Her lips curled into an ugly sneer. Oh, so you've turned them against their own mother? That's rich, coming from the woman who poisoned Derek against me for years. I opened my mouth to retort, but she cut me off with a harsh laugh. Save your breath, Lorraine. I want full custody, effective immediately. If you don't hand them over willingly, I'll take you to court and make you regret the day you ever met me. Shaking her head slowly, she leveled me with a chilling glare. Mark my words, you won't be able to protect them forever. With that ominous vow hanging in the air, she spun on her spiked heel and stormed out, leaving us all shaken. I clutched the boys tighter, feeling their tiny bodies trembling against mine. They shouldn't have to endure this trauma, not from the person who was supposed to nurture and safeguard them. When we returned home, Sheriff Davis was waiting on the front porch, hands shoved in his pockets. We finally got to the bottom of what Jenna's been up to, he said grimly, and it's not good. My heart plummeted as he recounted a twisted web of fraud, theft, and money laundering, all stemming from Jenna's efforts to siphon funds from Derek's life insurance payout after his death. She set up shell companies, forged documents, you name it, the sheriff said, shaking his grizzled head. From what we can gather, her crazy behavior was all an act. A way to get the boys out of her hair so she could pull off this whole scam undetected. White-hot fury blazed through me at the thought of her using our sweet grandsons as disposable pawns in her greed-fueled games. I wanted to scream, to hurl plates at the wall, to unleash the pure, primal rage burning in my veins. But I couldn't. Not with those two sets of fearful eyes, watching my every move, clinging to me as their solitary beacon of stability. So I inhaled a slow, steadying breath. Whatever Jenna's motivations, she's proven herself an unfit parent who's put them in danger. I want full legal custody. Relief flickered across the sheriff's face. I'll make sure our case against her is airtight. You just focus on taking care of those boys. He started toward his cruiser, then paused. And Lorraine, if she tries anything else, you let me know immediately. You hear? I offered a terse nod, then scooped Alex and Caleb into my arms, their small bodies melting into my embrace like they'd never let go. Jenna could hurl whatever malicious threats she desired. I didn't care about her con artist scheming or her vile machinations to line her pockets with my son's hard-earned money. All I cared about were these two precious souls who had already witnessed and endured far too much in their young lives. They were my entire world now. And if Jenna delusionally thought I'd relinquish them without a brutal fight to the death, she was soon to be rudely awakened. So you're really going to fight me on this? Jenna's derisive laugh crackled through the phone line. You senile old bat. I'll bury you. I clutched the receiver tighter, struggling against the flood of rage testing my restraint. If you think I'll let you within a mile of those boys after what you've done, you're delirious. We'll see about that. The smug venom in her tone made my skin crawl. My lawyer is prepping an ironclad case as we speak. You might have been able to manipulate the local cops, but I'd like to see you talk your way out of this in an actual courtroom. The line went dead with an ominous click. I slowly returned the phone to its cradle, steadying my ragged breaths. I'd expected Jenna's threats. Expected the nasty accusations and diversionary tactics in a desperate attempt to regain control of her twisted game. But her arrogance made one fatal miscalculation. She had severely underestimated the resolve of a lifelong educator pushed to her limits. As the morning light filtered through the curtains, I studied the two tow-headed figures sprawled across the guest bed, in a jumble of sheets and gangly limbs. Bruises and scrapes mottled their arms, remnants of being abandoned in the park like unwanted pound puppies. But their cherubic faces were finally relaxed in peaceful slumber, no longer etched with fear and uncertainty. In that moment, I vowed to do whatever was required to preserve this newfound serenity they so desperately craved, which meant playing Jenna's macabre game, and beating her at it without hesitation. I strode into the study and booted up my laptop, fingers flying across the keys as I toggled between search engine results for top private investigators near me and local family law attorneys with stellar custody case track records. Time was of the essence if I wanted to mount an unshakable offensive before Jenna beat me to the courtroom battlefield. 2 phone calls and a hurried conference later, and I'd assembled an elite cadre of legal warriors ready to dismantle whatever vitriolic crusade Jenna tried to wage. We're going to rip her facade to shreds from every angle. Annalise, the razor-sharp family law specialist, assured me over steaming mugs of coffee. Money trails, witness statements, a full forensic analysis of her involvement in your son's death. She won't know what hit her. The other woman, Mei Ling, was one of the area's most sought-after private eyes, having cracked countless high-stakes cases with her enigmatic brand of perception and grit. Her obsidian eyes glinted with determination. I already have leads indicating Jenna's scam goes far deeper than just fraud. We're talking organized crime rings, money laundering operations spanning multiple states. There's a good chance she had Derek killed to inherit those insurance funds. A collective chill reverberated around the table. I slowly lifted my gaze, feeling their scrutiny. I don't care what stones need to be upturned or what vermin you need to smoke out, I stated with flinty resolve. That thing is not going to terrorize my grandsons any longer. I want her exposed for the vile, heartless snake she is, and I want those boys to feel safe again." Mei Ling and Annalise exchanged weighted looks before giving terse nods of understanding. We knew the battle lines had been drawn, and all bets were officially off. Jenna wanted to sick her high-priced legal team on me? Let her wage her war. Little did she know I relished the chance to go nuclear if pushed. And I hadn't survived 5 decades as an inner-city educator by playing nice with bullies. The tension in the cramped courthouse conference room was thicker than New England clam chowder. I could barely meet the clouded gazes of the disheveled strangers flanking my sides, members of the jury still reeling from the bombshell revelations. Jenna attempted a sickly sweet smile as she rose from the table, emaciated frame swimming in her designer pantsuit, but the wanton arrogance that usually dripped from her had been extinguished, replaced by the skittish panic of a rat in a trap. I kept my own expression steeled and impassive, fighting against the savage curl of satisfaction in my gut. We weren't quite at checkmate yet. "Let's be reasonable here," she began in that saccharine lilt that used to grate my nerves like nails on a chalkboard. "I never meant for things to go this far. You all have to believe I only wanted what was best for my children." Mei Ling made a derisive noise beside me, thumbing through the damning evidence portfolio. Photos of money trails and encrypted communications between Jenna and a notorious cartel kingpin. Ballistics reports tying the revolver used to kill Derek to one of the mobster's henchmen. A chilling CCTV clip capturing Jenna's vehicle leaving the scene of the accident, moments after Derek's truck plunged over the ravine. "Is that so?" Mei Ling arched one sculpted eyebrow. "Because these financial ledgers suggest you spent over $2 million on designer handbags, high-stakes gambling jaunts to Monaco, and a literal palace in the Dominican Republic, all from the insurance payout after murdering your own husband." Jenna's mask faltered, replacing the sugary syrup with a hiss of venom. "You self-righteous vultures wouldn't understand. I was trapped in a loveless marriage, taken for granted at every turn. I deserved those things." "You deserve to leave your children orphaned and broke?" I growled, unable to contain myself any longer. "You deserve to slaughter their father, your own flesh and blood, in cold blood?" "Stay out of this, you cretinous relic," Jenna spat. "I had bigger plans, grander wealth waiting on the horizon. Derek was a stepping stone I needed to discard like all the others before him. Besides, it's not like those boys brought anything positive to my life." A collective shudder reverberated around the room. Even Jenna's own attorneys averted their gazes, disgust etched on their craggy faces. "Then I guess they dodged a pretty big bullet by winding up with their grandma instead of an egomaniacal sociopath like you," Mei Ling said, chin raised in defiant contempt. Lurching to her feet, Jenna unleashed the full force of her black rage. "Nobody was supposed to dig this deep. How dare you interfere with my destiny? Those brats and their pitiful trust fund were just the tip of the iceberg." She wheeled toward me, eyes wild with madness. "I hope you're prepared to suffer, Lorraine. Starting with watching your precious grandsons be stripped away once my associate's on the outside." The gavel cracked down as a hulking bailiff seized Jenna's flailing arms. "That's enough, ma'am. You've already dug your grave deeper than hell itself." In the pandemonium, Annalise discreetly slid her hand over my clenched fist under the table. A small, grim smile tugged at her lips. "We got her," she murmured, "in front of the entire jury. Attempted murder, conspiracy to commit murder, racketeering violations, criminal negligence toward minors. The rap sheet goes on and on. By the time we present our closing arguments, she'll be praying to go away for life instead of lethal injection." With dawning realization, I glanced around at the pale, stricken faces of the jurors, middle-class Americans much like myself, looking as if they'd witnessed the devil herself unleashed on their quiet hamlet. Not one semblance of sympathy remained for the raving, unhinged woman being restrained before us. In that surreal moment, the gravity of the victory sank in. My son's legacy had been preserved. My grandchildren had been pried from the clutches of a demonic succubus by the barest margins before it was too late. And the deranged charlatan who almost stole everything from me in her quest for wealth and power would finally be entombed where she belonged, in a cage. As Jenna's unhinged howls receded down the courthouse corridor, I felt the leaden weight of tension slough off my shoulders for the first time in over a year. An era of healing could finally commence. A heavy silence blanketed the courtroom as we reassembled the following day for closing arguments and sentencing. Jenna had been temporarily removed, giving the jurors some respite from her poisonous presence before delivering their verdict. But the tension was still palpable, a suffocating dread that the unthinkable could still transpire and that vile harpy might somehow slither away unscathed. Mei Ling squeezed my arm as we took our places at the prosecution's table. Just a little while longer. Stay strong. I managed a resolute nod, scanning the crowd until my gaze landed on Alex and Caleb, flanked by their court-appointed guardian. Their angelic faces were somber, almost sage-like in their premature hardening against the realities they'd been forced to endure. It fortified my resolve to see this malignancy eradicated from their lives once and for all. They deserved the world, warm homes, unconditional love, blissful days of chasing lightning bugs and jumping into leaf piles. Not this paradigm of toxicity and reckless self-interest. The courtroom fell into a hush as the bailiff escorted Jenna inside, her rail-thin wrists encased in shackles. Our eyes bored into one another, Hazel meeting Ice Blue in a silent clash of wills. "State your final remarks," the judge intoned, his weary tone betraying the aftershocks of the evidence he'd presented over the last several days. Jenna rose on shaky legs, painted lips pursing into a defiant sneer. "I have no final remarks, aside from the fact that this biased, uncultured backwater of a town has no comprehension of the grandeur I was born to achieve." A disgusted titter rippled across the gallery. Jenna's gaze flickered around the room before landing squarely on me, that sneer metastasizing into a look of pure, undiluted hatred. "They're my sons. My flesh and blood, not this decrepit harpy's. Yet because of your deranged witch hunt, I've been robbed of my rightful legacy, all for the sake of two ungrateful little bastards who did nothing but hold me back." Her voice rose to a shrill screech, spittle flying. "They don't deserve my fortune or my empire. I hope they rot right alongside you for the rest of their pathetic—" "Miss Mitchell?" The judge's boom reverberated like a shotgun blast, startling Jenna into stunned silence. "I will have order in this court." He turned his withering glare toward the jurors, who flinched collectively. In light of the overwhelming evidence presented, as well as the defendant's own admissions of guilt, any further grandstanding is unnecessary. Tugging on the hem of his robe, the judge exhaled a solemn sigh. "Jenna Mitchell, this court finds you guilty beyond all reasonable doubt on all counts, including first-degree murder, criminal conspiracy, child endangerment, money laundering, and racketeering. You are hereby sentenced to life imprisonment without possibility of parole." An anguished howl spilled from Jenna's twisted lips as the sentence hit home. "No, you can't do this to me. I was destined. I was meant for glory, for opulence." Two burly bailiffs gripped her flailing arms as she fought against their restraints with feral desperation. "Let me go. I won't rot in your cages, you pathetic scum. Alex, Caleb, you were supposed to be my legacy." Our eyes met one final time across the courtroom as she was hauled toward the doors. Ironic, the woman who had sacrificed her own children in pursuit of greatness was now little more than a rabid dog being carted away from polite society. As the doors clanged shut behind her, an eerie silence fell over the room like the aftershock of a bomb blast. We all remained motionless, struggling to process the finality of it. Then, a tiny sound pierced the hush, the muffled sniffle of a child crying. I whipped around to see Caleb burying his face in his guardian's shoulder, whole body shaking with sobs of bewildered relief and anguish. Alex's jaw was set in a rigid line, but crystalline tears streaked down his ashen cheeks. In that moment, my heart both swelled and shattered at once. No child should ever have to witness such depravity, least of all from the person who gave them life. But as I pulled them both into my embrace, permitting myself to finally unleash the torrent I'd pent up for far too long, I swore on my life it was the last trauma they would suffer. From here, their worlds could only grow kinder and brighter. The spacious backyard was bathed in a warm summer glow as the evening shadows lengthened across the grass. Raucous laughter and the crack of baseball against aluminum echoed through the twilight air. "Heads up, Grandma!" I barely had time to glance over my shoulder before the battered softball whistled past my head, Caleb's voice ringing out in a peal of unbridled mirth. Clutching my chest in mock horror, I shook my head at the now 10-year-old cherub barreling toward me. "You rascal! Where did you learn to throw like that?" "From Alex," Caleb proclaimed proudly, puffing out his narrow chest. "He's teaching me all his pitches so I can make the all-star team next year like him." I ruffled his sandy curls, speckled with grass stains and sweat. "Is that so? Well, you two had better work up an appetite for those famous Mitchell family burgers I'm about to fire up." "Yes," Caleb crowed, bounding across the yard to where Alex stood whipping pitches into an ancient catcher's mitt. At 12 years old, he was rapidly morphing into a young man, all knobby wrists and elbows jutting out at haphazard angles, yet the easygoing smile crinkling his eyes kept the last vestiges of boyish innocence intact. For now. As I busied myself stoking the grill, they resumed their impromptu batting practice, periodic whoops piercing the evening calm. Just a couple of rambunctious boys being boys, the way nature intended. Idly flipping the burgers, I couldn't help but gaze at them with a contented sense of pride and reverence. 2 years ago, they had arrived on my doorstep as skittish, traumatized waifs, their childhoods robbed from them by that soulless, vicious monster. But to see them now, shrieking and tussling on the grass with all the wild abandon of kids their age, it was nothing short of a miracle reborn from the ashes. "Grandma?" I glanced up to find them hovering at the edge of the concrete patio, grass stains crisscrossing their knees and t-shirts askew. Caleb fidgeted in that familiar way he did when broaching a sensitive topic. You don't have any other grandkids, do you? Just us?" My breath hitched slightly as I studied their earnest young faces. It was something I'd never pressed them on, not wanting to risk dredging up memories of that shattered former life. "No, honey," I replied gently. "Just my 2 favorite grandsons." Alex scuffed at the patio with his toe, jaw tightening the way it always did when wrestling with something monumental. "So you wouldn't mind if we didn't want to go by Mitchell anymore?" A pregnant pause stretched between us as my mind whirred, processing the weight of their request. Then Caleb barreled ahead in typical headlong fashion. "It's just, you're not like her, Grandma. And that name, it reminds us of all those bad, scary times we want to forget. We want your name instead, to match our real family." His imploring gaze shimmered with unshed tears, and I felt my throat constrict as the profundity of his plea washed over me. In that moment, I saw the depth of their courage shining through, 2 little warriors who had conquered more darkness than men 4 times their age. Clearing my throat, I turned to give Alex, my solemn, sensitive soul, an opportunity to voice what he'd clearly been mustering for a while. He held my gaze steadily. "Mitchell was never who we really were anyway. You're all we have, Grandma, and all we'll ever need." The words tumbled out in a childlike rush, but their impact was profound and eternal. A renewal of selfhood, an absolving of the shackles that had bound them to that venomous succubus's legacy. Crossing the patio in 2 strides, I enveloped them in my arms as my own tears finally spilled free. A kaleidoscope of memories ricocheted through me. Motherless childhood, dreams of raising kids in a loving home of my own one day, then the heartsick reality of being alone as an empty nester. Until these 2 battered little souls had resurrected my world from the ashes of despair. And now they were my entire universe. "Of course, my sweet boys," I whispered through the thickness gripping my throat. "From now on you'll have the family name you were always meant for. Sutherland. My Sutherland grandsons." Their answering embrace tightened with wordless emotion searing deeper than any dialect. A bygone open wound had finally mended into an unbreakable seal of wholeness. Jenna had gambled everything in pursuit of superficial glory, only to be banished into perpetual insignificance. But I, just an ordinary Midwestern widow, had reclaimed the greatest prize of all, a true, unshakable family, bound by the eternal ties of unconditional love.